March was a bit of a mad month for games. One of my most highly anticipated games of the year came out, and Jesus is it good. Other games were a bit of a letdown, and of course we got one of the best action RPGs ported to Switch. Suffice to say, I've played and reviewed way too many games this month, so let's talk about the absolute best and worst games of March 2023. We'll start with something that took me completely by surprise, and that is the Diablo 4 beta. I love action RPGs, and I was cautiously excited for Diablo 4, mostly because Immortals kind of stung me. So I got a code for the early beta, and I'm so glad I sat down with it because what I found was more Diablo, yeah, but an absolutely gorgeous game with seemingly a lot of build depth. I mostly streamed the game, so I wasn't paying attention to the story, but when I didn't stream it, I was honestly enjoying how cinematic it was. The camera will pan in on these in-game cutscenes, so you're no longer looking at two random character models speaking to each other. Now, I'm never looking for an in-depth story in these action RPGs, but maybe in Diablo 4, when the game fully releases, I'll actually pay attention to it and not just skip past all the cutscenes. But of course, we're here for two things in the Diablo game: a lot of stupidly fun action and a lot of loot, and the game has so much of that. And one thing I noticed after playing Diablo 2 after Diablo 4 is that Diablo 4 is extremely readable. The quest and maps are laid out so well, so I never got lost and I wasn't farting around the menus looking at what my next quest was. But my favourite thing of all was the Destiny-like public events that seemed like a way to just get hooked on a loot. All I can say is that I am definitely buying Diablo 4 on launch, and I just can't wait for it. Of course, the biggest game of this month was Resident Evil 4. And it delivered in spades. Of course, we have to talk about the luscious locks of Leon Kennedy. Yes, he's back, and he's even been animeified, and I couldn't wait to play it. Going into it, I was looking out for a few things. So I wanted the movement system to be updated, and I wanted them to fix the bosses that I didn't really like, and then change up the final two chapters so that they were as strong as the rest of the game. And I'm happy to say that the game is better than the original in pretty much every single way. The main draw of Resident Evil 4 for me is the expressive combat system. The encounters were like puzzles. Should I lure the enemy to a barrel? Should I kite them over a bridge? Or take the high ground and kill them one by one as they climb up? And Resident Evil 4 Remake does exactly that, but Leon's movement is so good that it enhances everything. There's so much more at his disposal, with a rather robust knife that you can stab, slice and parry enemies with. And the weapons that I previously thought were useless actually had a place in Leon's arsenal. And I found myself using weapons that I never bothered in the original. And even the new additions, or the ones I never discovered in the original, like the MP5 and bolt thrower, are so much fun to use. The story is mostly improved, and I say mostly because I think there are some drawbacks because they went for a darker tone. Leon and Ashley actually speak now and joke back and forth, which makes their relationship feel more realistic.
Pretty much a master of unlocking.
She no longer just screams, "Leon!" But the rest of the characters are used in mostly different ways. Luis is way more important to the story and no longer looks like PS2 Aragon. And then all the villains are similar, except for Salazar, who was less goofy, and that's the drawback in the story in my eyes. Since they're going for a more serious story, they have to tone him down, and there's something lost there. The boss fights across the board are all improved as well. The ones that were hardly changed, like the ogre and the fish, were given that extra bit of oomph with the graphics, so they felt way more intense. And then the changed fights like Salazar are just a straight up improvement. So in general, they did a great job here. The original Salazar fight was done in like a couple of shots with the broken butterfly, but this one you're actually running around dodging his attacks and using the environment to your advantage. As for parts of the mines and then the island, there isn't much improvement in the areas. There's still way too many enemies, and it removes the deliberate action that I really like in Resident Evil 4. But at the very least, with the new movement system, the game is catered towards a more actiony feel, so in general they just feel better to play. All in all, Capcom continue with our amazing Resident Evil titles, and this game will definitely be in my top 5. The biggest disappointment of this month was Chia. This game was shown off looking like a chill open world, heavily inspired by Breath of the Wild, and it was inspired by New Caledonia, which is an island I barely knew even existed. So exploring a place and learning about their mythology seemed cool. And from the start of the game, it didn't run very well. It looked gorgeous, but the frame rate was constantly dipping, so it took me out of it. In it, you play as a girl called Chia who can soul jump into different animals, and they all have unique abilities. So I was excited at the possibilities to explore this open world, but then you realise only birds are useful and the rest aren't, and even the unique abilities are used only a handful at a time. I had the same experience with the combat. You possess flammable objects and launch them at enemies, so I got excited because it started to feel interactive and sandboxy, but it was more one method kills every enemy, and then it was boring. To be honest, I would have preferred if the combat wasn't there because it didn't add anything to the experience, it only detracted. The story was completely unmemorable as well, with zero characters that I can even remember, and then the open world objectives were boring filler like find a trinket, stamina fruit, or do a diving board challenge. And I was extremely disappointed in this game, and yeah, it could fill a niche if you're looking for a chill game, but I wouldn't really recommend it. Next, we'll move on to PSVR 2, and I've only played one more game this month that I didn't cover in my PSVR 2 video, and that is Moss. And this game is just magical. It shows off the strengths of VR. So you are the camera, following the adventure and helping out a cute little mouse called Quill, and you can pet her and high five, and it's just really that endearing. It's an adventure game with little puzzles and combat sections, but it feels like you're in the world. If you look up, you realise you're on the forest floor and the moon is shining through the trees, and you can see all sorts of animals off in the distance. I played a bit of this on PSVR 1, and a lot was lost on me, mostly due to the blurry graphics. But here seeing Quill in her full glory is fantastic, and I can't wait to get into Moss 2. I haven't beaten it, but so far I highly recommend this game. Next we're moving over to the Switch, because I played a feck load of games on the Switch this month. First there's Octopath Traveler 2, which Square did send a code to me for, and I was loving it at the start. The combat is fun, finding new jobs is addictive, and building up your party with the right combination was my favourite part. But then the story hits, and that's where it fell apart from. Now the writing is much improved over the first, but the characters don't interact with one another outside of these optional conversations. Now, I'm sure some will say, oh, well, if you get into chapter 6 after 50 hours, then they begin to interact with each other. But feck that. I'm not playing 50 hours of a game to see if it's good. And it's a shame, because as a JRPG, this game is really good. The combat is snappy, and I love trying to figure out how to clear a whole battle in one move if I play my cards right. The areas are so diverse, and exploring the world is just amazing. But then the story hits and it ruins the pacing of the game. And unfortunately, for me to put this much time into a JRPG, I need everything to click, and only the gameplay clicked and not the narrative, so I put it down after 15 hours. Now this next game is an absolute must play, and it's Remnant from the Ashes. So this got ported to the Switch, and it's an absolutely fantastic port. For anyone that doesn't know, Remnant is an action RPG that takes some inspiration from the Souls games. You run through areas killing tough enemies and kind of tough bosses, and then you have a healing flask that recharges, and then a bonfire that respawns enemies. But the rest of the game is set up like an action RPG, exploring procedurally generated dungeons to fight bosses, get crafting materials, and find or craft cool weapons. And let me tell you, some of the unique weapons in this game are so cool. I had a big beam rifle that just absolutely destroyed every single enemy. And the game is so addictive, and the Switch port is great, with pretty much zero frame drop. And of course some compromises were made, but the game still looks pretty good, even though Remnant was never even a looker to begin with. My plan when I got this game for Game Explain was to play it for a few hours to figure out if the port was any good, but I couldn't put the game down, and I ended up putting like 10 hours into it because it's just that fun. Co-op is the best way to play, and some of the bosses have very unique attacks that make teamwork really important. Even playing solo though, the game is a lot of fun. I think the main criticism I would level at this game is that it's not too tightly designed. Procedural levels can feel bland, and some bosses are way too easy, and others are quite hard, so there's quite a range. Now in the moment, when you're dodge rolling, shooting, reloading, it's so much fun. But if you analyse it and go a bit deeper, then you can see some cracks starting to form, but regardless, the game is just plain fun. Next is a genre I've never touched, and that is cinematic platformers, and the one I played was Lunark, which was a solo developed game for the Switch. Now these platformers are stiff, but deliberately so. You can't simply run and jump. Everything has to be intentional, and you have to commit to each animation. I died so much because it was falling from heights that in a normal platformer wouldn't kill me, but here, no, you're dead. And the number of times I died trying to chain moves together is embarrassing. Once I learned to approach the game differently though, I was actually having some fun. The puzzles are simple enough, so I was never bashing my head against the wall, and the combat is few and far between, but it's also best to avoid it because again, it's stiff and the enemies can kill you. Now the game is gorgeous, and they did a great job at world building, and I found myself wanting to learn more about it through NPCs and notes and stuff like that. And I am glad I tried this game out because again, I've never tried this genre before, and I do like to try new genres as often as possible. But after I beat it, I had enough of these platformers, and it's just not a genre for me. I can't deny the game's quality, and if you are interested in a cinematic platformer, then this is a good place to jump into the genre because it's quite accessible, and I didn't find it too hard except for the final boss. Now the final game I want to talk about is Clash Artifacts of Chaos. The art style caught my eye, and Jesus is this beautiful, even if the character is potentially the ugliest character I've ever seen. Now unfortunately, my time with this game was cut short because of a glitch that has now been fixed, but what I played was honestly pretty fun. It's a character action game where you play as this orange guy and his little bird kid friend. Basically, you're exploring these open levels that have branching paths, fighting enemies with different melee combat styles. Now the combat is good, but it's not perfect. There is some AA jank to it, but it was still pretty fun. You can choose different combat styles and level up your character to suit that with new abilities and stats. The best part of the game though is the boss fights. As you explore, you'll run into these unique fighters that challenge you, and these have some pretty cool movesets and force you to engage in the combat properly rather than spamming attacks as I do with normal enemies. Honestly, I was having a lot of fun with this up until the glitch, and I did test to make sure that the glitch is fixed, which it is, but I would be careful and do your own research because I have heard reports of more glitches in this game. The developers were really nice and helped me out with the glitch, but in general, it does have a bit of AA jank. It's not going to be the most high quality game you'll ever play, so because of the quality, if you waited for a sale, then I would keep my eye on this because it is actually quite unique. Yeah, so I played a lot of games last month. Do any of these catch your eye, and if so, are you going to buy any of them? Or have you already played some? Let me know in the comments down below. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for watching. Join the Discord down below, subscribe, like the video, all that. See you all in the next video. Goodbye.